Welcome, everyone. Really excited to do our next XPC talk with Evie and Adrian. I will let them do the introductions themselves, but they're wonderful human beings that have been solving really hard problems in the referral space. I hope we can learn from them. We can hear their story and the ups and downs and the scars that they have healed over the years. So I'll hand it over to Evie, and then if you have questions, post them in the chat. We can always do follow-ups after this. And all right, I'll hand it over to you guys. So Evie, why don't you go first and have Adrian intro himself as well, and then jump into your presentation.
Yeah. Nice to see many familiar names on the list of folks attending here. And for those of you that are new and have never met me before, welcome and nice to meet you virtually as well. I'm Evie Cunningham. I'm an OBGYN physician by training. I still practice a little bit to keep my feet in the clinical space, keep it real. Do you want to come in? Oh, my husband wants to listen in. So, because he was a huge part of trying to solve this problem. So he's a ear, nose, and throat facial plastic surgeon. So I heard a lot from him as we were trying to solve this problem. But I am currently the chief medical officer of Cadence, which is one of the largest remote care healthcare tech enabled services company that provides RPM for congestive heart failure, diabetes, hypertension across over 35 states, plus some other care management services as well. And we've got some really cool tech. And I've been there for about a year. Prior to that, I was at Providence Health for 8 years. In many different roles, ranging from a CMO of a medical group, physician leadership, all the way to innovation, care transformation portfolio, where I had all of the telehealth, virtual health, digital health services under my portfolio, and was incubating this solution called MedPearl that we're going to talk to you about today. And joining me is Adrian Yanes, who is my co-founder and former CTO. Adrian, you want to intro yourself?
Sure. Hi, everybody. Adrian Yanes, computer scientist. My background has nothing to do with medicine until Evie got me into her team 4 years ago. But fundamentally, I've been spending my career building platforms and products in pretty much every single vertical. And 4 years ago, we got our paths crossed, and that kind of evolved into MedPearl, and eventually I am being the CTO for virtual care and digital health at Providence. Has been an interesting journey so far.
It has been quite a journey.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Okay, I'm going to move into slideshow. Okay, perfect. All right, so I'll start by telling the story about the problem we were trying to solve. I just wanted, before we started, to just make sure that I shared that we have no conflicts of interest on this discussion today, and everything being shared in this presentation today is available in the public domain. So we're not going to be sharing any confidential information. Okay, why can't I get this slide to advance? So when we think about the problem when I think about referral issues and referral friction is really part of a broader problem. And I wrote about this in 2020 in a Kevin MD article, just about how clinicians were drowning in electronic information. I was starting to see how the note load and the expansion of the patient charts was just creating such an overwhelming environment for clinicians. And I think we all know this problem today, but back then it wasn't as clear and apparent how significant it was going to be. And then there was just this rapid expansion of medical knowledge that was occurring. Medical knowledge, the quote everybody talks about is that it doubles every 73 days. That was a quote from Peter Denson from 2008. It probably doubles every 10 days now, for all we know. We can't keep up, and it's not humanly possible. And so we know that some of this expansion of data and knowledge and not really having intelligent workflows within the EMR is driving a lot of the burnout. It is a big factor that drives burnout in healthcare and with clinicians, because it's just not sustainable. I think one thing that really struck me when I'm an OBGYN, so I'm a specialist. So I was always viewing things from the specialist point of view. And when I went to become a chief medical officer at the medical group at Providence in 2017, I had a huge group of PCPs that were under me. And I remember talking to some of them because their panels were pretty small compared to the rest of the system. I think we had like the smallest panel size in my medical group compared to all the other panels, average panels in the system. And I was trying to get to the bottom of like, why are your panels so small? Why don't you want new patients? And I remember a PCP saying to me, the thought of seeing a new patient gives me anxiety. And I was like, explain that to me. Because for me as an OBGYN, the thought of a new patient, I would be like, oh, do I get to operate on her? Like, do I get to do surgery? Like, and she was like, I am responsible for everything that's in the patient's chart. And I have to know the patient. I have to know I have to be able to coordinate everything. And like, it gives me anxiety to think that I have to bring a new patient in and I have to learn all of these things. I don't mind keeping my own patients, but new patients is just really, really hard. And that was really eye-opening for me because I didn't think about like that experience. It really helped me have a lot of compassion for the people who are trying to do this work, because I get to focus as an OBGYN on a very narrow aspect of what's going on with the patient. And I get to ignore all this other noise that's sitting in the chart. And a PCP doesn't get to do that. And it's just overwhelming with so much clutter. So trying to advance the slide here. Oh, okay. So part of the way the problem surfaced itself, I knew that there was like this issue with the PCPs being overwhelmed, but I got called into a meeting with a bunch of CMOs of different medical groups in the Puget Sound region. And the head guy from the whole, physician group at Providence, he brought us all into a room. He said, we have a certain percentage of our referrals that are leaking out of the system. And when they talk about leakage, they mean like the patient they got referred to a specialist and they got sent to a specialist outside of the system. We need to stop this leakage. The leakage is like, there's huge financial impact of all these patients leaking out. Plus we have contracts with payers and we've got all these other value propositions. Like we got to figure out a way to keep all these patients and do what they call network integrity. And we sat down with the meeting of the minds and we were talking about how we were going to solve this. And it was all this like, it's an access issue. We can't get the patients in. They're waiting too long, so they leak. Okay, let's hire more doctors. Okay, well, that's probably not going to be a long-term solution because there aren't enough of us. Well, maybe we need to go and like drill down on productivity and make them more productive, make those specialists more productive, get them to see more patients so we can churn through more patients so they don't leak. And I was like, okay, well, in this age of like how much burnout we have, this is just going to piss everybody off if we start like, I get if there's underperformance, but if people are 50 to 60% productivity or above, like, why are we going in and harassing them to see more patients? Like they're going to leave or they're not going to like, they'll turn over or they'll get burnt out. And then there was like, well, let's do some CMEs and like have all these doctors come together as in CME and then they can meet each other and then they'll know to refer each other. And I'm like, that's like not going to be a scalable solution. And then the last was like, okay, well, why don't we force them to give us a reason if they leave and if they are going to refer the patient out, give them a reason, give us a reason, and they have to give us an excuse for why, and they have to justify it so that there's hard stops. And I'm like, oh, that sounds like a really great way to piss off your workforce. And I kept trying to tell the team, like, the access issue that we have, like we have a huge opportunity to improve access because we have a ton of dysfunction in the way we do referrals. And I would hear it all the time. I would hear it from primary care. Primary care would be like, I don't know what the specialists want. I don't know. They reject my patient. I send the patients to them and they send me a nasty gram. They tell me that I have to do X, Y, and Z, but I don't even know, like, how am I supposed to keep track of all of that? And then the specialist would say, I'm seeing all these patients that I don't need to see. I see patients, they send the patient for chronic cough to the ENT doctor, and the patient should have gone to GI because the patient had GERD, and then the patient gets bounced around. Or they send me the patient and the patient has no workup, and then they have to have like 3 visits before we figure out what's going on. Or they send me patients that I don't even need to see because they could just manage it if they knew how. And it's like, okay, we estimated that at about 50% of the time, something was happening in this primary to specialty care process where there were opportunities to optimize the referral. And there was like a loss in translation. There was a knowledge sharing gap that was happening between the patients, between the providers who were transitioning these patients. And it's not a knock on primary care because primary care is trying to do everything and they're completely overwhelmed, but we're not giving them what they need at the point of care to really make a very smart referral. And this is what was happening in real life. And I was just in clinic yesterday and I saw a whole bunch of sheets of papers and a bulletin board with all kinds of algorithms and decision trees written on them as well yesterday. So it's still happening. But what was happening was like all the specialists were trying to communicate to primary care in like different ways of like how to optimize, how to refer, how to navigate the patient down pathway. And half of this stuff was getting thrown in the trash because unless it had a way of getting into the EMR in an intelligent way, it was like not sustainable or not realistic to expect the PCPs to like be able to find what it is that they're supposed to do for specialty X, Y, or Z. So I went through a process where I finally got like some like leadership support to when I kind of framed the problem to them this way, where they said, okay, well, what are the common things that the PCPs want to know? Like, what is it that they need to know at the point of care in order to make a better referral? And like, how do we sort of start to capture that? And so I sat down with like a lot of the PCPs, with the specialist, and we kind of mapped out like, what are like the key top questions that you have when you're sitting to put the referral in? Like, what are the things like the pearls, the clinical pearls? Like if you could actually talk to a specialist in the hallway, these are the things, these top, not the 1 through 9 are like the top questions that we heard them have. And then I worked with a couple different specialties, urology, cardiology, ENT in particular. And obviously we had a OBGYN specialist. And we started to map out like for the common conditions that patients get referred. We had some like data that showed like what the top referring diagnoses were. Like for each of those, like how would you map this out and like provide this to the PCPs in a way that was like super easy for them to digest and process and like act upon at the point of care. And then so we sort of broke this down. I think initially we had this like really complex Excel spreadsheet and we knew that the PCPs weren't going to want to do that. And this is like, we're talking like 2021 right now. So this is like pre-Gen AI. I started like doodling in Lucidchart, and Adrian can tell you a little bit more about when he found me. I had like these massive Lucidcharts that could like envelop the world of broken down, codified like knowledge, basically the big decision trees that live in our heads. And then I started to like translate it into a bot builder that I could like build in, which was like a no-code bot builder. And then I published it into Microsoft Teams and got a bunch of doctors to test it. And we built like a feedback loop in it to get feedback on how to make the experience better and the workflow better and the content better. And that's when I thought that was just going to be like this fun project that we did with our partnership with Microsoft. And I was going to move on with my life and on to the next thing. And that's when I met Adrian. So Adrian.
Yeah. So, well, first of all, a moment of silence for all the engineers that were traumatized with Lucy chart and menopause algos from Evie, because that was an interesting journey. When we met, obviously, I was completely new to healthcare, and I didn't really understand what the problem was. I couldn't believe that doctors didn't have more sophisticated tools than Post-its, PDFs, and kind of diagrams, right? So she and I we spent like a month arguing, like, just prove me that this PDF stuff is real. Like, actually, you are in PDFs and you are sending messages and all that. And I remember it was like August 2021, you were sending back screenshots and messages and pictures, like when you were showing me, like, look, this is how we do it. And then at some point I go, okay, well, you know what? You give me, I was exploring some product development opportunities at the time. Like, you can give me, I think, 9 or 10 doctors, I told you, to show up into multiple calls. I will interview them. We will do a bunch of questions and we will figure out what the problems are. Because what you are trying to do is to be, as an SME, really provide a solution. But I think the problem actually is broader. Can we go to the next slide?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and in that slide, it's like, okay, let's do that. If you're familiar with the framework, let's go to the jobs to be done framework. Let's try to talk to the SMEs. Let's try to truly understand the problems they have. And let's try to find the solutions for those problems, involving them as part of the creative process. Like I actually am a strong believer that SMEs know what the problems are. They just don't know the solutions, right? So if we get you to talk about the problems, we might be able to navigate what a possible solution will look like or not. And what we realized pretty quickly is that actually this wasn't about having a bot answering questions. There was a whole platform problem in the way clinical guidelines and medical knowledge was flowing through the system. It was acquired by doctors and actually was applied to patients. That was the fundamental problem we were applying. Can I go to the next one? And that brought, kind of like a flashback to me as a computer scientist. Like, okay, I have seen this problem before in the past. I have seen that actually in software development, in which if you actually don't have the right tooling for collaboration and really, creating things together in a way that is organized, in this case, knowledge and medical knowledge information, it's going to be really complex to actually get to a point in which you have mass adoption and frankly, mass scale. And there is 2 really good examples in computer science history that prove this. One is the Wikipedia, in which, of course, we know anybody can go and edit that. And the idea there was like, well, we need a knowledge base that people can actually collaborate and there is governance. It needs to be rigid, but it needs to be flexible. And then at the same time, I knew that there's a model that is really well proven, which is if you actually put something out there and provide the SMEs the tools to contribute, you will get some folks to contribute. It was part of the problem, how you get people to really create medical knowledge. And that was the philosophy, like, hey, we actually can create a platform in which doctors can collaborate together on medical knowledge, and that medical knowledge can be somehow computationally enabled, that can actually get patient data and do what you're supposed to do. Somehow we are resolving the problem because, you standardize information, the information will be at the point of care, it will be super fast, easy to consume, and it will be connected to the data. That was more or less the idea. Can we go to the next one? And part of my obsession from the beginning was like, well, in my view, and respectfully, when a patient goes to the doctor, what they are doing is basically using the doctor to compute themselves with the medical knowledge the doctor has together with the patient chart, right? And the reality is the medical knowledge today, living in PDFs or living in whatever medium you choose before we create this platform, it was incomputable. Like the doctor will need to still consume the data, apply it to the knowledge, and push it back into actions into the patient. So we really focus on how we can create a tool that can really brain dump all this knowledge doctors have on their heads, and at the same time can collaborate with other doctors to verify that actually is the right thing to do in this particular condition. And of course, we need to make it into a way, before, pre-Gen AI, in which, there was not so many doctors coding. Things are changing quite quickly, obviously. We need to make it into a way that anybody that was, pretty much onboarded or trained within a few hours could actually codify knowledge either with decision trees or through the platform. And then the final aspect was, of course, this is medicine. You need to make sure that there is proper governance and editorial control. So we create a whole tooling. I mean, there's 2 components, right? There's the backend behind and then the frontend piece. And in the backend was this kind of community of doctors collaborating, and creating the knowledge that was needed. And that kind of landed into, can we go back to the previous one?
How do I go back? Oh, shit. How do I go back?
You're moving forward, yeah. Go back.
This one?
That one. No, the next one, sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, that kind of landed into, okay, we got kind of like a flywheel in which we could get, many good doctors from Providence to actually help us out to try the system. We have access to a really, really big database of obviously patient data that could be used to actually train the engine and make sure the conditions were surfaced on time, right? And we spend a lot of time, and when I say a lot of time, like I cannot even quantify the amount of hours we truly spend with doctors talking about how you will resolve this problem, how things should work for you in order for you to use a solution like that. And one of the fundamental conclusions we landed is that we needed to meet doctors where they live, which sadly tends to be the EHR, right? So all of that basically ended being kind of the genesis of, let's create a tool that helps doctors to collaborate on medical knowledge, that can push the knowledge into the EHR. And at the same time, let's connect the medical knowledge to the patient data so we can offload, we used to use a lot the second brain analogy, right? Like we can offload some of the computation into the tool, right? So you need to do chart digging, you need to look for conditions, the systems will be proactive, not something that you actually go and need to search for. Can we go to the next slide? Mm-hmm. And in my head, and the way I always, explain to everybody else that was technical or familiar with the tool is like, hey, we are just creating a GitHub for doctors. This is a place in which people can create knowledge. There's going to be governance, there's going to be version control, everybody can do it. And the broader vision at some point was, we wanted to create a platform in which the best possible content, was available. So, whatever Providence was the founding member, maybe in the future there will be libraries from different clinics or different hospitals. And eventually you could assemble, whatever library was best for you, right? And that's how it was architected. And the concept and proved to be quite valid, because we found that once you actually have the tool to enable collaboration, the whole governance, the making sure that the guidelines are up to date, the systems you can put in place to make sure guidelines actually are reviewed properly and all that, all the PDF, emails, meetings that were around that were centralized in one single point, right? Which is one of many the systems did or have done in other industries. Can we go to the next one? And then finally, the missing piece, once we actually figured out the kind of content creation, content governance, was, well, you need to connect this to the data, right? And this was, I think, perhaps the biggest differentiator of anything that was out there. We realized that if we will get doctors to actually say, well, this piece of knowledge should be actually linked to this particular point of data, then things will get really useful. And then we invented something called contextualization, which is basically the idea of rendering the patient chart together with medical information, with basically medical knowledge at the same time. Some of the stuff you're seeing today with, Gen AI is similar in a sense that they try to basically go over whatever data points you have. The reality is that the way it was built here was slightly different. The doctors will actually link the knowledge, will say, hey, if I am talking about diabetes, just pull the glucose in this moment. If I am talking about headaches, these are the algos and these are the data points in the chart you need to bring. And one of the big aha moments was, well, of course you have SNOMED, Low Inc, and all these beautiful standards. Surprise, nobody seems to be using them. So we actually need to come with a lot of creative ways to really be able to pull the chart properly, because the different, especially at the scale we were running it, which it was like around 300 million lab tests, and hundreds of thousands of patients, obviously, to pull the data into a way that was consumable by the tool. And that end basically on what, the solution end being, which was this contextualization engine, the ability to pull the patient chart and link that to knowledge in real time at the point of care.
So I'll talk a little bit just about like a couple of use cases of kind of how this would work. So by the time I had left Providence, we had about 1,000 of these built out in the system. So it encompassed about 95% of what a PCP would typically see. But we started to get adoption from specialists as well, because it just made things easier to find things for a lot of the specialists, because it sucked the clinical data out around a condition and organized it for you when you were seeing the patient. So it helped with a cognitive load for a wide array of physicians. But this is just an example. We had these test patients in the platform, and there's a hyperlink at the end of this slide deck for a Stanford Biomedical Informatics Grand Rounds that we gave for computational medicine late 2024 that has the live demo of this if anybody ever wants to see it. But essentially, like if you could imagine, there's a trigger where there's a patient that comes in, he's 66-year-old male, reporting fatigue, hair loss, whatever. And at the time, it was more of a search-based experience, but we were working towards more of like a nudge-based experience where it would actually be automated. But the clinician could search hypothyroid or thyroid disease. And then if the hypothyroidism algorithm came up, they would go down a decision tree, and they would also have these relative data points listed for them. So it would tell them, this is what the TSH was, normal free T4, couldn't find any TPO antibodies. It would ask a couple clarifying questions, like, is the patient over 70 or under 70? Because the management is different depending on that. Is there any prior history? So sometimes there's things that may not be in the chart. There are things that you either have to ask the patient or you have to enter. And then spits out a curated recommendation based on the pattern, because as you know, we're trained to think in patterns, and so we mapped all these patterns. And then also we had this list of like different insights that were built in, and this was based on feedback from the providers, where patients didn't always behave according to what an algorithm said. So for example, if the patient said, well, that's great that you want to put me on levothyroxine, but I don't really believe in medicines, which I just saw a patient yesterday who told me she didn't believe in medicine. So it's a real thing. Can I do something that's natural or like, alternative? So we had like an integrative medicine insights that was evidence-based. It would provide the clinical recommendations behind whether or not to do it and help the provider counsel the patients. But this is just an example of one of the use cases. Another use case, this is one, actually, I don't know, Joe, if you want to bring this one up, because you helped me build the hearing loss and tinnitus algorithm. But one of the things that I would hear about, like, frustration with referrals from my husband, because he's an ENT, and he would get a lot of like referrals that sometimes were either too late to come to him or didn't need to come yet, or weren't supposed to go to him at all. They were supposed to go to a different type of specialist. But one in particular that we did hear quite a bit about, because it saved like 3 different patients' hearing, was this hearing loss one. There's most hearing loss is not an acute issue that needs to be seen by ENT right away, but there is one pattern, which is acute sensory neural hearing loss that's unilateral in nature. And a lot of PCPs don't know, or urgent care providers don't always know, something that needs to see ENT within 72 hours. And we actually had a couple patient stories come up of clinicians who use this algorithm, were triggered to basically get the patient in and advocate for the patient to get them in right away, so that they could get put on steroids or potentially get a steroid injection. And so this was one that we talked about. It was a story that we told quite a bit, because it had quite an impact. And so if the patients wait too long, then the hearing loss is gone, and there isn't really a way to reverse it. So yeah, this is one of the really big win patient stories that we had. Just to give you an idea of kind of how the adoption grew, I mean, we had some pretty great signals that there was a thing, because we got, even before we had the contextualization, we did have quite a bit of adoption of the solution. The contextualization made that take off even faster. But by the time I had left Providence, we had over 7,000 clinician users, and over 300,000 searches that had taken place in the platform. One of the top algorithms, the top ones were like headache, abnormal liver enzymes, but menopause was in there, which was one of the ones that I helped write. And I think it was like 5,000 patients or something were able to benefit from being able to share that expertise. It made me feel like, I was able to sort of help enable and empower PCPs who wanted to prescribe HRT or wanted to prescribe bioidentical hormones, like that I could share that knowledge with them in a meaningful way, that they felt comfortable that they could take care of those patients. And so that was something that I was really proud of. And like I said, we had over 1,000 guides. We had also launched in 2 other health systems before I had left. So it wasn't just at Providence. It had been, we had pilots going in 2 other health systems as well. And we got published in the New England Journal of Medicine Catalyst. I'll have a link for that at the end here, that also talked about our ROI metrics and our KPI metrics. It was really important from a value proposition and from a funding and from a commercialization, all that perspective, validation perspective, to make sure that we had really solid KPIs and ROIs. So you can see on the left some of the soft, more like physician, clinician wellness ROIs were listed there. And then on the right, more of those hard dollars. We had a really great signal before I had left on downstream contribution margin per referral, which is like a CFO metric that really showed what we wanted to drive was more clinically appropriate access. So the higher, I don't want to say they're higher value patients, but like the patients that really need to see the specialist, getting them in, and the patients who can be managed or workup started, or matching them to the right type of specialist. So the platform did give guidance, like for example, for chronic cough, you could send the patient to allergy, ENT, GI, or pulmonary, and it helped the clinician think through which one of those specialists probably make the most sense to send the patient to first. And then if they need to be sent, what level of urgency is a high urgency referral versus like not an urgent referral, because that was another thing that the PCPs struggled with it a lot as well. And we're asking for more feedback and understanding. And then how long do we think that's going to be? So you can help set expectations with the patients. And these are our resources for further learning if folks want to learn any more. And Paulius, I can send the deck out after this as well if you want to share it. So that's kind of going to wrap up the end of our presentation. And I think at this point we can go into dialogue and ask questions. Thank you so much for your time.
This is fantastic. I was at the edge of my seat, so I could tell others were really, intrigued based on facial expressions. So thank you for that. I can either ask some questions myself, but we also love hearing from people who are here, and raising the hand is the way to do it. Alex.
Oh, I think you're on mute.
You're muted, Alice. Yeah.
That was a cool presentation. My daughter is eating peas from the garden. If this isn't coming through, let me know if I can repeat anything. Making referrals suck less in markets that are super fragmented, so not large health systems that are all on one Epic instance, but a lot of mom and pop family offices with just a handful of clinics, sending patients from primary care to nephrology or cardiology or gastroenterology, and no one's really talking to each other. A lot of people are still on paper, and a lot of the obstacles we run into are clerical in nature, as well as patients getting sent to ophthalmologists who don't do cataract surgery, and then having to go through the entire prior auth process over again. Is that I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit to challenges faced in those settings and what Referral did.
Yeah, so we actually talked to a lot of. I think I heard his question. We actually so there's two pieces to answering that question. We talked to a lot of FQHCs or public health entities. We actually went live in a Indian Health Services Tribal Health Authority as well. In those areas, we were not able to do EMR integration. It was more just the knowledge base to guide the referrals. But there was a lot of interest because, to your point, it's really challenging in some of those environments, and sometimes they only have like one shot. The other thing is around like knowing who does what. And Adrian, I don't know if you want to speak to some of like the discovery, like some of the evaluation we were doing around trying to kind of create profiles. I know that there's some other tech companies that are trying to work on that too, but we were looking at claims data and like trying to sort of profile different specialists based on like what they actually did. Adrian, I don't know if you have
we also integrate, I don't know if I got the question right. Like if you mean those settings that they are not in Epic, we look, and we actually did not only integrate with the tribal system, but we are integrating with health exchange information also. Like many of the stuff we were doing. Yeah, many of the stuff
I forgot about
we're
that.
doing was really, many things happen. Using Fire APIs, and like one of the things we did, which I recommend to pretty much anybody, is try to obviously keep things as standard as possible, because that will bring you to other EHRs, as at least the read APIs will be available. But kind of the thing we proved is the knowledge base was agnostic enough, regardless of the clinic and the system, like could be used by pretty much everybody, right? It wasn't only for a big healthcare system, number one. And number two, the integration lift wasn't that big either. So I do think that, the same approach could have worked for small clinics or small systems, regardless of the EHR that they were using. If that's the question you were doing, because I hear that you were saying those folks that are not in Epic, like it was truly agnostic, both in content and in kind of technology connector for the EHR.
Maybe someone else wants to go. It's a little louder on here.
Yeah. Any other questions? Ed? Oh, you're mute, Ed, I think.
We can't hear you.
So maybe I'll ask a question. Hopefully you can hear me. The slide around ROI, soft and hard ROI, can you talk about how you arrived at that number? Because when you were just starting out, you probably didn't know what your RVU ROI was or otherwise.
Yeah, so we looked at people who were basically high utilizers of MedPearl over a period of time, and compared to people who were not high utilizers, like of the same like group, because we basically had case control, because not everybody adopted it. It was voluntary. So we, I think we specifically focused around, we had this like, we focused it on primary care and express care providers, which express care was like the urgent care / virtual urgent care, a lot of APPs. And so we did a couple things. We compared RVUs, if they were high utilizers of MedPearl versus not high utilizers of MedPearl. We also looked at like pre-MedPearl, post-MedPearl as well. So we looked at like those types of comparisons. We also looked at, we did a survey. This is before we had the contextualization, but we did a survey of this was pre-MedPearl, both post-MedPearl. Pre-MedPearl, how comfortable do you feel with working up patients, referring patients, knowing which specialist to send the patient to? Like, what is your level of confidence or competence around that? And then after you have MedPearl, like how do you feel about those things? That was that statistically significant survey that we did, and it showed a pretty significant bump. This is all in the New England Journal article too. But it showed a significant bump, like that this tool is what I call is supportive technology. Like it's helping the clinician still in the driver's seat. They're still making all the decisions, but it's helping them in a supportive way to work through whatever problem it is they're trying to solve with the patient, or figure out how to navigate the patient to the right place.
That's great. Ed, did you have a question?
I think I did address my tech issues. I am particularly interested in behavioral health referrals, and I'm curious if you have any anecdotes or experiences from that. I've heard many pain points around psychiatry being somewhat overwhelmed with referrals. And first of all, any anecdotes there are interesting. And then in particular, any thoughts you have about like what the workup looks like that is satisfying in that referral?
Yeah, so we actually, one of our biggest champions was Arpan Wagre, who is the CEO of Wellbeing Trust. He was one of our biggest champions. We got a grant from the Wellbeing Trust, and part of that grant was used to help us build out the behavioral health library even more. One of the things I didn't mention is we had micro videos embedded. So kind of like quick, like 1 to 2 minute specialist, hey, like, here's how you do this with your patients, videos. We didn't do it for every specialty, but in behavioral health, the grant was specifically focused around behavioral health, because we know that we need to empower primary care to be able to manage some of this. And they don't have time to go sit for hours in lectures. We've got to give them quick, in the moment, micro learnings is what we called it. The area that we focused specifically was around substance abuse for part of that library, and empowering. One of the problems we were trying to solve is like, how do we get the PCPs to prescribe Suboxone and feel comfortable with prescribing Suboxone, because we have such a massive need for that in this country. And so we were actually able to demonstrate. I actually didn't talk about this in this talk, but it is something that we talked about externally. We were able to demonstrate that there was an increase for the MedPearl users. There was an increase in Suboxone prescribing for those users. So we were really able to show that this actually did influence them to feel more comfortable with prescribing Suboxone. We got a grant also from, I can't remember what the name of it was, but it was the Wellbeing Trust helped us with it. We got a grant to evaluate physician well-being. And I know they're still working on it, because the guy who's working on the data science piece like texted me a couple of weeks ago just to be like, that they were starting to measure like some of the impact more. But and then to talk about workup, I think it kind of, there were at Providence in particular, there were a couple of really big initiatives. There was the Suboxone and empowering for Suboxone. There was suicide prevention, and there was depression management. So those were like the big rock areas that we really wanted to like empower primary care, because the psychiatry departments were basically just saying like, it's months before we can get anybody, even if it's an urgent referral, it's months. And so how do we like offload and unclog some of this and like distribute our expertise? As far as like specific workups, I think it depends on what the topic was. But they all had like decision trees that helped the clinician think through and give them guidance on when to refer. Ganga. I think Ganga has.
Hi.
Ladies first.
Hi,
Okay.
Abby.
All right.
Hi, how are you?
Good. Thanks
Good
for
to
giving
see
the
you.
talk. Nice to see you. I lost a little bit because my laptop died. Now I'm on my phone, but I think all good. So your talk was great. I wanted to ask you a question about specialist steerage, as we call it. So I'm at a company, to give you context, called Stellar Health, and we have a platform that is tech-based, but our newer group is basically we take risk and have ACOs. And so we're trying to influence our medical groups that we're contracted with to make decisions that are better for patients, in terms of cost, better outcomes, et cetera. And so we're thinking about steering them to the right specialists, but we don't actually have, we don't own these medical groups, right? We're just in risk-based contracts with them. And in doing so, we have a lot of claims data. And that's how we get a lot of the information into our tech platform to surface that data to the medical groups. But is there better sources of data to get from specialists in these areas where we're not located, right? So other than claims, before I came on, my product person had done some investigation and found a group called CC Group, which is like a consulting firm that just had a lot of this data about specialist outcomes. But of course, we have to pay a lot of money for that data.
Yeah.
And so we're kind of like thinking about like, how do we get more and better data other than just looking at claims? But I'm wondering if you had any thoughts on that.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's a really good call out. And I feel like, there's companies like Cotivity and Trilliant, that are out there that's are trying to like make sense of this. I think the thing that's really challenging is, and even ProPublica, right? Because ProPublica has some outcomes related data, but then it's only Medicare patients, right? And so I'm an OBGYN. I don't see a lot of Medicare patients. I mean, I wouldn't have very much data. And so I don't know. I don't know of anything that's like best in class that's out there that's solving this, that I've seen recently. I think there's a lot of solutions out there that are like directionally saying that this is what they want to do or what they can do. But then when you kind of look under the hood, it's like there's still much to be desired. Adrian, I don't know if you have any comments on like things that you did a lot of discovery around the HIEs. Do you have any thoughts on that question?
I think in order to gather data or to basically find better insights regarding a specialist, I mean, Truvera could be a place where you could look into. There's a bunch of anonymous data that you can actually pull and run some studies there.
Can you get it specific to a provider? I don't know if you can.
I think you do it to a certain degree. That they have no ability to do it depending on the level of disclosure, that's for sure. Obviously, HIEs is one way to do it. The problem is like legislation will force you to have some medical reason to pull any of this data. So you actually are kind of left with either anonymous databases like Truvera and others, or just claims, right? Now, I will say, and this is an untackled problem, I still think that the public data on claims is a really, really interesting data set that nobody has really squeezed to what is possible. And I say that because even if it only represents a small, not small, a percentage of the amount of obviously healthcare practice in this country, there is a lot of useful information you could derive from what specialists and providers are doing based on those claims. And maybe the final feedback is, well, even if you look into it and you don't think it's sufficient, try to figure out if any of the new technologies regarding information retrieval could bring you and help you to build maybe knowledge graphs around those kind of claims, and see if you can query in ways that are more creative. Because I still have the hypothesis that you should be able to actually know what a provider is doing just based on those public claims. Like there's a really good representation of your activity. Of course, the other data, and you will need to go now specific to the healthcare system, will be internal private billing data from the healthcare system and the specialist. That will actually surface the whole picture, right? And nobody's doing that to my knowledge.
Thank you.
Hey, Estelle here, founder of Trellis Health. Firstly, thank you. This is fascinating. I love the work that went into this. A couple of general questions. One is, where is this now? So it's obviously like you've left Providence. Is Providence spinning it out? Is there still work to be done on it? Like, is it being turned into a private solution? If you know of anything around that.
I think I can give you the most correct answer. Is like, we would love to know, both of us. We don't know the answer to
Okay. Good to know.
But a great question. And I know there is some public knowledge about this out there. Health Endeavors owns the platform today, and it's a company that you could reach out and contact. That's as much as we can, honestly, as much as we can.
We don't know anything else besides
really
that. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. That's by design.
Yeah, fair enough. Okay. And then my second question, also a general one, but like, I find it really fascinating in this like age of AI, like where does the balance of work live between PCPs and specialists? And I think like historically, right, like there's too much knowledge for one person to have. And so PCPs would be the coordination layer and refer out a lot. Yeah. And I think with like knowledge access changing and open evidence and like all of these kinds of things, like more and more and more of that work could potentially be handled by the PCP. And so I guess more of a general one is like, how do you see that playing out? Do you actually see like less referrals happening and the PCP being able to handle more of this in-house? It sounds like yes.
That was the hypothesis. I mean, we wanted to give PCP's superpowers. Like, and we were doing this pre-Gen AI. So like, I know that, and like Adrian and I have talked about this multiple times. Like if we had to go back and like build it all over again, like what would we do? And we obviously would like change some things about what we did and where we ended up. But like our hypothesis was we knew that there were a lot of things that could be managed. Now you also need to have aligned incentives for the PCPs to like feel remuneration and like be properly compensated for doing this extra work. But our hypothesis was like, we need to supercharge their decision making. We need to make a delightful experience for them when they're in the EMR, trying to navigate through with their patient. And then like we should be giving them superpowers, because a lot of this stuff they can do. We just need to empower them to do it.
And originally, we even designed that into the tool. Actually, it's still today there. We actually came with the concept of personas precisely because of that. Like PCPs, also nurses, and also even MAs. The platform was designed with different knowledge, kind of top of the license to do that. And I would say, based on the data I saw, definitely help a lot PCPs, especially the newer generations, maybe the less trained folks, to be more empowered and do more because they felt the tool was kind of endorsing the diagnosis or helping them to take the diagnosis. Like part of the thing, there's two things I think that none of the Gen AI systems is resolving, which is it's extremely complicated for the systems to actually be validated to take the decision on behalf. So they're just nudging the doctor, right? And one of the challenges we have today with Gen AI, what the system with Referral didn't have, is with Gen AI, you cannot distinguish between original content versus content that has been generated on the fly. Versus this one, you knew there was a doctor and frankly an editorial group behind stamping the solution. So answering the question, I do think PCPs will do more in the future if they get technology and solutions that they can trust at the human level, not only the technology level. And that's still unresolved. I mean, the closest analogy, and frankly, the dragon we were battling was up to date, right? The problem with up to date is that there was not enough time to consume all the data. That was the thing. But I think it's still missing on the ecosystem a tool that really helps PCPs and RNs and PAs and MAs to really consume content and say, yeah, based on this one, I can take the decision. I feel empowered to do it.
Yeah, the other thing that we did that was unique that still the open evidences of the world don't have is that with open evidence and with the LLM solutions, if you are only going to get an output as good as your input. So you have to input a prompt, right? And if you don't know what to prompt or don't know some of the specific details of what to prompt in order to get your ideal output, you may not get the best information. And that's why we had MedPearl prompted back to the clinician and asked the clinician questions to think through the problem before it outputted and told you. So it would be like you could put in a question and then it would ask back like, okay, well, let me clarify a couple of things and pull up some data, and then would give you an output after it had you kind of work through the problem.
And one comment on that one, we battle this idea a lot, but I actually think that every single system out there today, including us, was failing because in the moment you actually are asking a question to your user, you have not done enough, right? Fundamentally, I do think there is enough data in the EHR and enough into the context, and this is where I think actually ambient could go, what has not gone. Like if you will be able to catch the conversation, have access to a knowledge graph of the patient chart, and have access to a knowledge base that is verified, I actually believe that computationally it will be possible to look to a screen and get the next suggestion, right? Today we are not there. All of us are either prompting or searching, and that's where we were going. It was like, can we really surface and answer enough of these questions that we will be doing to the patient, to the doctor automatically, based on the context they are talking? That's where I think folks will feel much more confident, because in the fact that you are actually putting the question, you're already questioning yourself, right? You're asking the system what you're supposed to be doing. I think systems need to evolve to a point in which they are either suggesting or at least surfacing you the information, because that's how doctors are operating when they look into the EHR. They're looking into facts that they've taken, as part of the decision. So all the systems need to still evolve, I think, to really fully empower folks to take the decision on the spot without scaling up to the specialists. By the way, we saw a lot of traffic from the specialists as well. It was also proven that the tool was really helpful for a specialist itself to actually go and refresh the knowledge and get better into a particular condition or diagnosis.
Fascinating. Thank you.
Sure.
These are great questions. I know, Alex, you had a question. We will save it for Slack. The cool part is that everyone is there and we can continue the conversations. Really huge thanks to Evie and Adrian. This was phenomenal. To be continued. I'll post the recording. Y'all can review it. I'll probably rewatch it, honestly. There was so much information. And I think, maybe next time we can talk about how when patients get access to these tools, how they can advocate for themselves and like what happens next,
Yeah.
So
yeah.
You all, this has been great. Thank you and see you out there.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a safe trip back.